Hello everyone, Andres again for Option Poker, and we're going to review now how I usually approach when I have different, in reality it's a different game, ante or straddle in the table. So I have been studying ante for a long time because I've been primarily an online 6 max no limit player, and it happened a lot that we had to play 3 max, 4 max, 5 max up to 6 max with ante. And still I have been studying it extensively for a couple of years. However, with the straddle, I can make like a primary approximation, but probably you'll have to study it by yourself. So the first thing that happens when you are playing with ante, of course, is that there is dead money, and then there are two main ways to adapt to it. First is, for example, if you raise really small, it's more like a limp, okay? Because basically there are so good pot odds that your opponent is forced to be calling all the time. So actually playing with the small side things when you're playing with ante can become a limping way. So to clarify, I established that the small line was 0.5, the big line was 1 blind, the small ante was 0.25, 0.20, it doesn't matter, and the big ante was around 0.5. It also reminds me to the game at different places. There are different sites across the network where you can play with this kind of a structure. So if you go to 300, 400, up to 800, you will see that you have here the small ante and the big ante, and you will see how it evolves. For example, here the maximum ante that you play at PokerStars would be something like 1.25, 1.20, which is when this is like this, it's how it's usually in PokerStars. However, when you're playing live games, it might be varying. So you'll see that the ante can go really big, and the ante in the table can be much more important than the blinds. So if you go here, for example, and you are playing, this is the equivalent blinds, and you're playing 510, playing with the small ante will the equivalence will be 7.515, just playing on 300, and the game can go up to 4 times bigger almost when you are playing with big ante. So the ante can be much more determining than the blinds that you are playing, and this is important to keep in mind. Why? Basically what we do is like we divide the ante in 3 parts. 2 parts will go to the big blind and 1 part will go to the small blind. If you go here, you will see the same structure. And this usually works pretty well to calculate the stake you are playing. So for example, if you are playing, let's say 5, 10, 5 with 5 of ante, and you're playing a 900 game, you are playing with 4.5 blinds extra. It means that there are 3 blinds, I mean 66% going into the big blind. So actually it's a game which is 22.545, which is 4.5x. So when you're playing live, keep in mind that if you add the ante, it will have a huge impact, especially on how big pots are building, how fast you are building the big pots. So if you're playing deep stack, it's going to have a huge impact. Here we made a few the main thing that happens is that if you're raising the same sizing, you should be raising much more, and if you're raising bigger, if you want to raise the same amount that you are raising without ante, you should be raising definitely bigger. If you are defending the blinds, and is the easiest way to see it, we will start by the blind versus blind. Usually when we face when we are in the small blind, we are in the small blind and we face we face an open hand. I have put, let's say, 0.5 blinds, and the pot already has the 1 and 0.5. So my odds are 33%. Here, if you go with the ante, it can go up to 13%, 10%, 9%. So once you are here, for example, you should be playing around 95% of the hands. And if you are here, let's say, you should be playing 65% of the hands. And of course, if you have lower odds, you will be playing more and more until you're playing all the range, and you'll be limping it. If you're in the big blind out of position and you face a raise first scene, for example, into 3 big blinds, you will face that you are you have to put is 3 minus 1 blind. You have to put 2 blinds, and the pot will have the 3 blinds from the raiser, the 3 blinds from the big blind, and the small blind. So it's going to be 3 divided by 6.5. So actually this is 0.31. Yes, No, because you have to put two blinds into a pot of 6.5, so it's 0.31. Sorry. So actually, if you compare this to a regular ante at Poker Stars, it's going to change a lot. It's going to be 0.256, and if you go into the really live games or like new games that are surging, and you go there, you'll see like the ante is going to determine a lot and can change the odds a lot. And if you go through this chart, you will see that when you're facing a main race with two big blinds, it might mean that if you face if you have a big ante, it will be the same as racing to three big blinds. So just to get an example here, if the ante is extremely big and my opponent raises here and I'm here, it will be closer to face a min raise than facing a three big blinds raise. So this gives you an idea on how important is to defend the blinds when you're facing ante, and you cannot miss it, especially against small side things. You should be playing a lot. We can start to extrapolate things. Of course, if my opponents are raising smaller, I should be calling wider as well in the other positions. I should be calling wider in the cutoff, in the button, in the small blind. Does it worth to make specific charts? Definitely no, because the charts will depend a lot on how big is the ante and how my opponent is raising. So I never have charts for ante. I don't think they are necessary at right nowadays. Games are not full ante. If they were full ante, we could think about that. But given that they are not full ante, I don't have charts, and I recommend you just to use your common sense. If, for example, I'm playing 50% of the hands in a specific spot, and there is a small ante, you can play, let's say, 60% of the hand. But if the ante is very big and they didn't change your settings, then you should be playing 75% of the hands. And it's going to happen with all the spots. So for example, if my opponent goes into the small blind and he limps, and I should be raising, let's say, 37% of the hands, I'll be raising 45% of the hands if there is a big ante, because my opponent is forced to play more hands. This is also important in the small blind, and it's important at every single position when we are defending. Like, we need to be aware that we are playing much higher stakes, that we need to play much looser, especially against the same side things. And many people tend to use the same side things, which I think is a big mistake. You should be raising bigger, because otherwise you are choosing a strategy that you don't mind, which is a mix between limping and raising and just calling. Imagine there is a huge ante and your opponent min raises. We all agree that this is more like a limp, right? So it's kind of the same when my opponent has an ante and he's raising small, or he doesn't change his siphon. Even if he doesn't know, he's using a strategy that a very different strategy that he would like to be using. And now we go to Straddle. Straddle is a complex game. Basically, it means that we have the button, then the small blind, the big blind, and there is another big blind which doubles the blind in the straddle. So basically the blinds are something like this. Okay, and they have position over the other. So the straddle is over the big blind is over the small blind. So when we arrive to let's start through here. It's very easy. So basically, if the big blind arrives and opened, you have one player behind of you, and the player is in position and you're out of position. Then you are playing with an extra small blind, so you have better odds. So it acts like an ante, and then you should be playing a bit looser that you will be playing without a straddle. The second most regular position is when you raise on the cutoff. You have one guy in position and three guys out. One guy which is in position against you, and three guys who are out of position against you. So basically here, we cannot raise as much as in the cutoff because we have one extra guy, but we have one more guy. Like if we were in middle position, let's say, we would have two guys out of position, in position against me, and two guys out of position against me. Now I'm having one guy in position against me and three out of position. So I have to raise more than middle but less than cutoff. If middle should be raising, let's say 18%, and cutoff should be raising 25%. Normally, it's more important the fact that the number of players that we have behind is more important than the position. So I suggest something like 20 or 21, which goes closer to middle position than it goes to the cutoff. So I'll be raising something, let's say in the cutoff, something like 21%, something like that. On the button, it seems like the cutoff, but it's different because you have 3 players, but the 3 of them are out of position. So definitely you have to raise more than the 25, but you then need to raise less than the 40% that you'd be raising in the button. So actually, if you need to raise something between them, you have, as we said, it's more important the number of people that we have behind. So I'd be suggesting to raise on the button 30% instead of 40%. If there is an ante or something like that, then you can raise a bit more. As you will be raising something like 45% of the hands with the ante, if you had this ante, probably you can raise something like 32 to 35. Something around here will be the equilibrium. And then the most weird position is the small line because you have 2 players out of position. So definitely you need to raise less than the button. The button should be raising something like 45. You also already have a small line, so you have better odds. So let's say you should be raising if you had this position in the button. Let's say that you have the ante already put in the button. You should be raising, let's say 50. So you need to raise definitely less than 50 because you have 2 players out of position and not 2 players in position. So I'd suggest that you need to be raising more than this guy. So something like 40% should be fine. So this is a good way to, on a heuristic method, try to extrapolate, give like different points to try to find an equilibrium. Of course, this is like poker snowy. They are not scientifically methods. I'm not an expert in this kind of things, but it's not something that you can prove, but it still works very well. I know that it will be more than this. I know it will be less than this. I know that this is one factor, this is the other, this is more important. So then I try to go to this factor. I try to weight more this factor, and then the number that would be around this. So the main point here is that when you're playing a straddle game, most of the times you're not playing the toughest game in the toughest game of the world. So it's more important try to have an okay strategy and try to excel at the other parts. So I recommend you to play all the straddle games that you find, because I've never found a very tough straddle game. And try to keep these things in mind when you are going to play that. I think that ante game is even more complex because it will bring you to more situations, but ante game is much more studied and you'll have more like ways to know what are your ranges, what ranges are fine. On the straddle, in the first stage is a bit more complicated, but then it becomes a pretty easy game, not a very complicated. Then the only situation that is a bit harder is, for example, how you are going to defend a big blind against your opponents, because you have one guy behind, and alright, but you have to play, for example, a range wider than against the button. Why? Because it's the same as the button. You have one guy behind, he's raising around 40% of the hands, but you have position against this guy. So it's like this: if it was a small line button and big blind, you'd be out of position against both guys. So this is why, for example, if you should be playing, let's say 78% of the hands, you should hit like 22% of the hands. You can play here 27% of the hands. 5 point extra seems a reasonable thing, or 26, 25, something like that. I mean, this is the kind of ideas that comes to my mind when I need to figure out where should be the solution of a new game.